Your machine is dead. Your other machine is delayed. But would you like a banana? It's December 2001, and this is Yesterzine. At the end of 2001, N64 magazine had a problem, and it was reasonably fundamental. People had stopped making N64 games. In fact, issue 59, dated October, had exactly 0 reviews in it. While the N64 hadn't suffered quite as badly as the Saturn did in the face of the Sony PlayStation unstoppable landscape-changing juggernaut, it did not escape. And the arrival of the PS2 was in the process of hammering in a few final nails. No problem though. Nintendo have already revealed their fancy new machine, the Gamecube, to take on the PS2 and the new impending dark horse competitor, the Microsoft Xbox. Meanwhile, Sega, Commodore, Panasonic, Philips and Atari had all tapped out entirely from competing, and in at least 2 cases, from existing. So you could argue the path was clear. N64 magazine made the only possible call with their November issue, launched on the 24th of September. Namely, pivot to cover the launch and inevitable unqualified success of the Cube. A problem emerges. The first issue of the newly renamed NGC launches, as advertised in mid-September. The Gamecube isn't launched in the UK yet. In fact, as they go all in on Nintendo's baby box, the machine doesn't have a launch date in the UK at all. It gets worse. Magazines have very roughly a 2-week lead time from finalisation to release. So when NGC issue 60 went to press on September the 10th, 2001, the Gamecube was not available to buy anywhere. NGC are upbeat though. While they lament nothing better than spring 2002 maybe for Europe, the Japanese launch is less than a week away, with 500,000 machines and 3 games to be available on the 14th of September. With no Cube games ready for this one, our focus is the second NGC badged issue, which lets us look at the 3 launch titles, and by which time at least the Cube should have had its triumphant release in Japan. Plus, we can see what you do with a magazine that's covering a format that, for most of its readers, isn't going to exist for half a year. But first, let me take a big swig of coffee and check global events for the week of September the 10th, 2001. It has been a long time, so just in case you didn't spot it, the 11th of September 2001, between the press date and publication of the previous issue, was the date of the hijacking of 4 planes. 3 of those were flown into buildings in the deadliest single terrorist attack in history, the consequences of which you could argue we are still experiencing in various ways. Readers of that issue, who wouldn't have got the magazine until 2 weeks later, would of course be familiar with that, and the unfortunately bullish tone of NGC regarding the launch, just 3 days later, of the Cube in Japan. Understandably, that was at least part of the reason the Japanese launch is described next month as quiet. Despite the effective locking down of global travel, 450,000 of the 500,000 planned units had reached stores, which was fine because only 175,000 of them were sold. Along with a similar number of the 3 launch games, Luigi's Mansion and Wave Race Blue Storm from Nintendo, and in a move that would have been inconceivable half a decade earlier, Super Monkey Ball from Sega. You'll note the lack of the word Mario in that paragraph. I said last month, semi-correctly, that every Nintendo system had a launch Mario game. In the UK, the release of Super Mario Sunshine did just about qualify as launch window. Here in Japan though, it was nearly a year away. Despite the pace of sales picking up over the next few days, NGC largely rejects the World Trade Center argument in favour of putting the boot in on those launch titles. In America, understandably, demand for pre-orders had been sluggish, but would quickly pick up, helped by both a delay and supply constraint for the near-simultaneous launch of the Xbox there. Nintendo weren't immune to those constraints though, having got nearly 500,000 for Japan there was barely more than that for the whole of America in mid-November, and Walmart were telling them that wasn't going to be nearly enough. All this, and even a month later, the UK and Europe has no idea when they'll get the machine at all. 2 pages later, Shelley Friend of Nintendo is given a grilling, which, judging by her picture, may have been literal. She says they don't want to give a date until it's a date they can commit to, but is insisting they will still hit spring 2002, which to me sounds like committing. In reality, the Gamecube would eventually reach UK customers on the 3rd of May, just about within most definitions of spring, but leaving NGC with 7 months of magazine to fill before they can write about anything their readers can easily spend money on. It also means that, as they did with the N64 here, Nintendo miss Christmas, something Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi described as unacceptable for everywhere else. NGC point out the upside is that the launch lineup should be better at least, claiming that unlike in Japan, there will be something for everyone on launch day. This claim stands up. Whereas there were 3 launch games for Japan, we got around 20. The additions included the mandatory FIFA and Pro Evo games, the latter still calling itself ISS. Sega added Sonic Adventure 2, and the teens would be happy with Hawk and Mirror offerings. There was Star Wars, and the driving game fans were well catered to, with Burnout, Crazy Taxi, the underrated Cell Damage, Wipeout clone Extreme G3, and Driven, which also exists. None of which were available to NGC. Considering their future hinges on people betting Nintendo when the PS2 was already out and Microsoft were showing off Halo and Project Gotham, they're pretty brave to make their highlight quote for the entire interview, "European citizens are used to being treated as third-class citizens by the Big N." We'll of course look at those 3 proper Cube launch games shortly, but first, this far ahead of launch, how do you fill a magazine about a format? The charts show the start of the struggle. The Cube, of course, doesn't have any. So 2 months into chucking the format over the side, there's a page of the top 10 N64 chart. And it may say something about the whole life of that format that a launch window title, Mario Kart 64, is sat at number 2. A reader's top 5 most played chart that puts the 3 GC games that virtually no one can get hold of above all the N64 games, I'm very comfortable just outright calling a lie. Equally awkwardly, the magazine itself calls out Perfect Dark Zero as most wanted, making this the first game we'll see that never ended up coming to Gamecube. That one was fair enough though. As the Gamecube launched, Microsoft bought control of developers Rare, and the game would enter a slight development hell that wouldn't see it appear until the 2nd generation Xbox. That's something of a habit. As of mid-2024, the 3rd game, a soft reboot, has been in development for at least 6 years. We've only just seen the first gameplay from it. Unsurprisingly, the magazine is previews galore. 4 pages goes to the still year-away remake of PlayStation Crown Jewel Resident Evil. There's a surprising lack of the launch games. For instance, instead of Crazy Taxi, we have Simpsons Road Rage. And if this looks familiar, it did to Sega too, who sued. And the case was ultimately settled on non-disclosed terms about which you are free to speculate. Pikmin 2 would go on to be perhaps the new Nintendo IP of the generation, but it was one of several Nintendo deliberately delayed to make sure there wasn't a huge void after launch. They sensibly correct the impression people had that Pikmin was some kind of real-time strategy game like Command & Conquer. It really isn't. It's more of a squad-paced puzzle game, especially in its later versions. All 4 are now available on Switch, and I highly suggest starting with the 3rd, a beautiful game apart from a dipshit last boss. Where have I said that before? The one launch game is Star Wars Rogue Leader by Turrican Devs Factor 5, a dev that shares with this show a love for continually using music by Chris Hulsbeck, by which I mean you've been listening to some for the last several minutes. The perils of constructing a preview section this early are demonstrated by our remaining 2 games. Doshin the Giant would reach Europe, but not for a year after this magazine's publication. That's better than All-Star Baseball though. None of the 3 games in that series that were released on Cube made it across the pond. That's it for previews though, and even the reviews will end barely halfway through the magazine. Next up is that surprisingly common piece of half-assery, giving the prevailing handheld format what you claim is its own separate magazine in the middle. NGC was perfect bound, so it wasn't literally a pullout, but otherwise it's basically the M-Force scam again. Although in this case I've no idea who they think they're selling it to, because it's not mentioned even once on the cover and gets a space in the contents smaller than the machine itself. Not to question these commercial decisions, but the Gamecube would eventually sell a little over 20 million units. The GBA, which crucially was a machine you could actually purchase if you lived in the UK in December 2001, would quadruple that. It had also just set launch sales records in both the UK and US and would outlive the Cube in production by at least 3 years. All this earns it 7 whole pages, reviewing in steep descending order of quality Advance Wars, Jurassic Park 3 Park Builder, which is basically less good theme park, X Games Skateboarding, which is less good Tony Hawk, and an X-Men game that's less good Final Fight. Next month promises previews of Star Wars and Resident Evil again. On the plus side, they've just remembered one of the top 5 formats of all time. Speaking of, the house ad for Mountain Biking UK. That magazine still exists as of this month, 437 issues in. The rest of the issue is dedicated to the newly also renamed Club GC, which helps you get the most out of your games. Which predictably means the section is going to be heavily skewed to the N64, rather than using space for the current format we currently cover and has a bunch of new games and which outsold the N64 and Gamecube combined. For instance, I'll get over it now. Mainly because the first game tipped is Mario Party 3, which isn't out for another month. Unlike 100 or so GBA games which, okay. To be fair, there's good ideas here, notably the community high score boasting section. I'm the best. Although it's notable that most of the scores seem to have been set by magazine staff and developers, not readers. Slightly cruelly, they described Martin Kitts as being ex-NGC. Given he was last seen 2 pages earlier, that must have been one hell of a disciplinary hearing. The readers also get to set challenges, and there's a competition involving a full 20 of them to win a gratis subscription. I'm not saying it's unlikely, but one of them involves beating Princess Slide in Mario 64 in under 13 seconds. The best score so far is over 16. Only one man has got even half of them, so take a 20-year belated bow, Jamie Hobbs of Thetford, and checking for his name back in the main section causes me to spot a friend. Its official lovely man and developer of multiple Dizzy titles are Fred Williams. We have no evidence to suggest any of this section is dodgy, but I should tell you, our Fred doesn't remember any of this, and told me Blitz's PR department hated anyone talking to the press. There's a directory of N64 games and a letters page, notable only for a catastrophic printing error in, ironically, the section dedicated to correcting mistakes. If you want an indication of how long ago even this seemingly recent generation is, this is what one reader describes as the big TV. Actual Gamecube content though, as they break down the always fascinating subject of menus, and a discussion of what the backpack seen in Super Mario Sunshine screenshots does, complete with this gaffe. In the demo, it looked as if the backpack was full of water, and there were lots of pools of water around, but that would be a pretty shallow concept. Awkward. The magazine ends with a genuinely interesting feature on the making of Mario 64 with developer Giles Goddard. It includes the revelation that part of the game was developed with modified analog pads from a rival console. It's actually difficult to work out what this might be. The analog pads for both the Saturn and PlayStation were released after Mario 64. The 3DO, CDI, CD32 and Jaguar, as far as I know, never had one. Anyone got any ideas? And while you ponder that, we've got some launch games. Our first game has a mountain to climb, because this is the first time since the Famicom that Nintendo don't have the red moustached one right there in your face on original launch. Plus, of course, Super Mario World and Mario 64, the two previous generation's entries, were widely considered genre-transformingly brilliant. Although I know the lovely Dan from the Sega guys is loudly objecting at this point. Given that World was coming off the back of Mario Bros. 3 and with a certain blue hedgehog in the vicinity, and Mario 64 had 2 years of 32-bit 3D to face, that was no small feat. Luigi's Mansion gave Luigi his first top-of-the-show credit in gaming as far as I'm aware, but it's not his first starring role because of course he was the protagonist in educational title Mario is Missing, a game where Mario is in the title despite not being in most of the game. And also an educational title that sometimes mistook urban myths for facts. I mention is missing though because in the Great Book of Nintendo Plots, there are about 3 entries and it uses one of them. Namely, Mario has been kidnapped and Luigi has to go find him. Mansion adds extra steps, but it's still basically the same plot. Luigi has won a mansion in a competition, huzzah! It hasn't occurred to him that the fact he never entered a competition to win a house should make him in some way suspicious. It certainly does Mario, who rushed after Luigi to stop him doing anything stupid. Mario, being considerably more resourceful, has got there first, and apparently running headlong into the obvious trap house didn't qualify as doing anything stupid, because that's exactly what he's done. You know, I don't think Mario is the tactical genius I've previously considered him to be. Luigi, having taken the scenic route, arrives at the house where, after a brief explore of the lobby, he runs into our local friendly ghost hunter who teaches him to use the legally distinct Ghost Dustbuster. And that's about as far as he's prepared to help. He's just been hanging around outside the house waiting for someone to stand still long enough that he can get them to test all the new stuff rather than do it himself. I never said Luigi was a tactical genius. Or the guy that's hanging around outside an abandoned house just assuming some rube would stop by. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of this game it turns out he's the one that organised the fake contest just to speed up the process. Certainly as far as I've played through, there's no indication the ghosts really want anything other than to be left the hell alone. You're not going to do that, of course, because you have slightly redder, fatter you to save. And so we pile in, vacuum cleaner and surprisingly capable Game Boy in tow. Our job is to suck up the ghosts, an instruction your mum previously badly misheard. But also, solve some puzzles, steal all the money that's not nailed down, and presumably, retrieve a Mario. The game plays out as a series of rooms, mostly gating you by hiding a key behind some form of completion. You need to blind and suck the ghosts, and sometimes do a little light investigation, which does present some challenges. The controls on the vacuum are a little awkward, and the explanation confusing. The game says to hold it opposite the ghost, but that obviously doesn't really work. And worse, someone decided a good idea was to lock the controls inverted and offer no option to change it. So there's a 50-50 chance you're someone who is going to spend the majority of this game pointing a hoover at a ceiling. It gets a bit samey too. I'm an hour in, and it's mostly the same repeating loop with just the occasional section of Nintendo magic. It's sometimes accused of being just a trudge room to room with ghost battles, and that's not entirely untrue. Some of them are clever and require thinking, of course, but they're spaced in a way that you're probably supposed to consider them bosses of worlds, despite the game not formally being divided up as such. Understandable, this is the first one in a series, but it probably shouldn't be a relief that your highest profile launch game for a system can be completed in as little as 3 hours by the practiced, and 6 hours on average by visitors to How Long to Beat. Mario 64 was twice as long, and had a lot more extra to do to 100% it. So you can see why a Luigi warm reception. The 2 sequels are twice as long each, and have a lot more variety. I'd recommend you grab 3 on Switch if you can. I wouldn't suggest seeking out this if you missed it at the time, unless you end 3 and 2 wanting more of the very, very same. NGC give it the treatment the big Nintendo launch game deserves. It's not like they're short of space. There's a 10-page review here, and you can see they allocated that space before realising there's not that much to write about this one. It turns into something of a player's guide, the last thing you want for a 6-hour full-price game, and spoils several of the better set pieces, which isn't great when there's only so much of them in a game you could, conceivably, finish on day one. So we'll do what we all did back in the day, just take a glance at the conclusion. And it's no surprise. They praise the look and originality, which is absolutely fair enough, but they consider it short, point out you need to do a lot of walking around the mansion, and that it's shallow. Still gets 90 mind. Single format magazines, eh? Metacritic tells more of the story. Its average back in the day was 78. The later 3DS port just 74, and that's probably more accurate. As a companion to a proper Mario game, it might do a bit better, but Luigi's Mansion, especially the first one, just isn't enough to carry off a full console release, especially against the PlayStation 2 and the stomping entrance of Microsoft. So where to turn? Well, Nintendo have one more option for their Japanese launch buyers, and it's a racer. Much like with the previous game though, it's probably not the one they expected. The next Mario Kart was 2 years out. This is a sequel to the Luigi's Mansion of racing games, Wave Race 64. That's a better analogy than you might think. Wave Race on N64 was brilliant, with water physics that were truly massively beyond anything anyone else was doing. Anything that could have been done on the 16-bits, or even anything that at the time was being done on PC. It was also short. It's got very few modes and just the 8 courses, and that was enough for the first game. It was genuinely transformative with its physics, and it'll still give you a good game. It's an unsung hero of the N64 generation. But of course, if you were going to do a sequel, it'd have to give you more of all that, have physics that stretch a Gamecube like the original did the N64, and a whole lot more content. They did do a sequel. Nintendo are a games company, not a technology company. They've always said it. And this might be the one time I ever remember them indicating otherwise. Wave Race Blue Storm begins with a credit for the Nintendo Software Technology Corporation. They were proud of their water physics in the N64 Wave Race, and it continues here. And well, they might be. This is a game nearing a quarter of a century old, and even the title screen is gorgeous. Which makes it even weirder they then instantly forgot about it and we've seen nothing new in the series since. Imagine how this could be on a Switch 2 when it's announced, for instance. The demo is the same. It's a league above anything we'd seen for the best part of a decade. The range of conditions demonstrated even more so. It's a marvel, and I really wish they'd pushed it more at the time because there was nothing on either rival machine that looks as convincing as this. From the evidence so far, it's everything I was hoping it would be. So I'll immediately highlight a downside. You choose characters to play as, and each of those come with their own music and a crew chief who will talk to you in the races. I choose the Brit, Nigel Carver, and his crew chief, Terence. I've no idea where Terence is from, but it's not Britain. He's got the worst fake accent since Dick Van Dyke, alternately overpronouncing words in what Americans think is the manner Brits do, and then using outright Americanisms like buoy for the boys on the course.
Right, you passed that buoy correctly. Okay. Good show. Right, you are. You have just earned a turbo.
So okay, ditch that plan. We move to the championship mode with the generic Japanese competitor who probably is about as authentic as Nigel, I just won't notice. To pass each round, you don't need to finish in a specific place as such, you just need to be on enough points total after each of the 5 races. Again, I'm immediately stunned with the water on a 23-year-old game. It's only recently that games elsewhere are pulling this off reliably at all. Wave Race doesn't trade on its visuals though, it's the technology involved in the physics on water that Nintendo were proud of, even in the original Game Boy version. This first race is on a relatively calm river circuit, but even so you can feel it. You ride the surface as much as the course. Even here it requires a light touch, and that's at a premium as you have to make it round the boys to follow the course properly. The game is a little forgiving here. You can miss 4 during the race and continue, but it will wipe out the building of your turbos, which will be vital to stay ahead. There are also, of course, immensely difficult things to fire off at the wrong time. A second race at deceptively confusing Harbour Oval confirms this. The waves are higher today, and I spend my entire budget of misses to finish 4th. It's enough to keep us on track though, between the points banked and the forgiving course system. This could have been a sim, and the physics might suggest as such, but this is still Nintendo. Those physics are here, in service of having a laugh. Things get back on track with an easy win on a calm lake circuit, but let's skip forward one to absolutely filthy conditions in this city circuit. The waves are 9 feet tall compared to the highest so far of 3. It shows, especially when I mistake a wall for a jump on this, my first go. The driving rain, the massive waves and the plentiful obstacles mean I have a bit of a nightmare, but it's still super impressive. This is an arcade machine that never was. I'm deliberately showing you the first go. It is manageable, but it'll keep you on your toes, and you should remember you have whatever points bank you've built up and the allowed boy misses to help you. Blue Storm's incredible in general, to be honest. It includes a tutorial mode to help you learn the controls and play around. You should make use of it, then sit back and enjoy the replay mode, which would make owners of anything else in 2001 jealous. It's not perfect. There's still only 8 courses in the game, and really only the Grand Prix mode has any longevity. Although, treated like an arcade game, every race is an adventure. NGC agreed. They rated this above Luigi's Mansion, albeit by a solitary percentage point. Given how short Luigi is without this level of replayability, I'd extend that gap, or at least say this still deserves its rating, whereas the 70s for Luigi are fair. We're not done though. There's a third launch title, and it's by an old friend. It's one of the things the younger half of the audience might not fully appreciate, that the first decade or so of mainstream console gaming was Sega versus Nintendo. The rivalry, especially here in the UK, was at least as fierce as that between Sony and Microsoft these days. The Master System won the 8-bit era here, but not by a huge amount, and Sega had largely repeated that success with the Mega Drive while also adding worldwide fame. In 1994 or so, they were kings as we headed to the next generation, where they would have over a year's head start against their big rival. And with the non-PC computers dying off, and consoles from Panasonic, Philips, Atari and Commodore already commercial failures, then there was absolutely nothing between Sega and dominance. You know it didn't work out that way. Sony came in and steamrollered everything. Sega, with first the Saturn and then the Dreamcast, were commercially hopeless. And with the DC out of production 18 months after its UK launch, Sega made the huge call to go third party. The alternative was even scarier. Sega of America CEO Bernie Stolar had advocated selling the whole company to Microsoft. Which is mad, of course. Why would Microsoft even want to buy a games publisher? Oh. In reality, those talks had taken place and largely went nowhere because Microsoft thought Sega were doomed. And they might have been. Sega were sitting on 1 million unsold Dreamcasts and were hundreds of millions of pounds in debt. It took a deathbed gift of $500 million in forgiven loans and $700 million of returned shares from former President Isao Okawa to secure the medium-term future. Sega did sign a deal to develop multiple Xbox games, but they would not be exclusive to MS. And with the Xbox not yet released, the first releases were conversions of Dreamcast games, like 18-wheeler American Pro Trucker, Crazy Taxi, and Echo the Dolphin to PS2. But as far as I can tell, the first original non-DC sourced title was a Gamecube launch exclusive, a conversion of arcade game Super Monkey Ball, and it made up the third of Nintendo's launch lineup, a concept that half a decade earlier would have been a lazy April Fool's joke. While it's not a Dreamcast game, we're not exactly breaking the mould here. It's created by Amusement Vision, a new team, but one founded by Toshihiro Nagoshi, chief designer of Daytona USA and Scud Race. Monkey Ball is their first console game, based on their third arcade release, at this point just 3 months old. One thing you might have noticed is the sponsorship from Fruit Giant Dole. It's really subtle, with only a logo on every banana and pretty much every other flat surface in sight. All must be Dole. Praise Dole. It even extends to the arcade cabinet, about which a less mature video maker would make a joke. It won't work on me though. Advertising never gets into my head. Given Monkey Dole was developed as part of a rebellion by Nakoshi-san against the expectation for him to keep churning out racing games for Sega, the Dole brand banana has not fallen as far from the tree as you might think, consisting of rolling a ball through increasingly complex levels to the exit, something you effectively do by driving it. Monkey Ball's central mode is 3 sets of levels of increasing complexity, but the beginner ones will illustrate our point perfectly well. You get to the exit, within the time limit, collecting as many delicious healthy Dole brand Dole fruits as possible. 100 vitamin-packed Dole potassium sticks and you get an extra life. This is, after all, an arcade game. It doesn't take long for things to get tricky, even on beginner. Monkey Ball is a game that will require absolute precision. You don't want to be attempting this one if you've got a controller with stick drift. It'll send you over the side in less time than it takes to consume a healthy name brand banana. While the time limit isn't a major problem earlier in the game, it will become so, and given you need 100 healthy dolls for an extra life, it's not really worth going chasing after single ones in the levels, especially as bonus levels will let you pick up many in one go, much like a trip to the doll display at your local supermarket. It's risk reward and it's not worth it. If you thought I was over-egging the doll thing, much as you might mistakenly do when making tasty, nutritious banana bread using their product, look at level 8. It covers Dole of the level, and it's the first really difficult level because in trying to balance my Dole on an incredibly Dole moving surface, I inevitably suffer my first Dole of the game and have to replay it. And of course, by this point the vertical Doles keeping you on the level are a thing of the past. It's enough to make you go down the shopping Dole for more Dole. I'm sorry, that got away from me rather. I can only apologise to the non-native English speakers for any of this. One thing I do struggle with is the camera following you. There isn't the independent control we'd probably take for granted now, which means on level 9 for instance, sighting your exit onto the ramp is difficult, as is correcting your landing without accelerating off the side. The 10th and last beginner level is the graduation test of course. It's full of narrow platforms which get progressively trickier, losing the bowl shape, making you go down steps, gating your speed by travelling uphill, and ending in a very long narrow curve that'll cause you to notice the rapidly depleting timer. An interactive credit sequence that I don't feel I've earned plays, although that really gave me time to think. There's probably no game more Dreamcast than this, and in another reality that's of course exactly what it would have been. It's obviously designed for a single analog stick system. Every part of it looks like a Dreamcast graphics engine. Hardly surprising since it runs on the Dreamcast adjacent Naomi arcade system. It's a shame the DC never lived long enough to see it. But it also makes sense that it's a Gamecube exclusive even if the series didn't remain so. This era of Sega did split their exclusive in this fashion. The Xbox got Sega GT and Jet Set Radio Future, the more involved original titles. Nintendo got the arcade conversions. Not even sure who got the best end of that deal, but NGC felt this outshone both the Nintendo penned titles, if only by another singular percent. That's a debate. I'd still just about prefer Wave Race, but Nintendo appeared to agree because in a move that must have driven the final nail into many a playground debate, Nintendo hired Sega and AV for one of their other franchises they were about to entirely forget about, F-Zero. And while GX remains the latest full F-Zero, Monkey Ball continues to this day. And this is why you might not want to come back to the original. All of its stages appear in the recent Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania, which even has a remastered mode where some of the difficulty spikes are smoothed out. Banana Mania is by Ryo Go Gotoku Studio. And if that name is familiar to you, it should be, because what they've become a lot more famous for is this little series. What's the Yakuza team doing messing with monkeys, you might ask? Well, that's because they are Amusement Vision, having merged with Jet Set Radio Team Smilebit in 2005. Ryogo Gotoku actually translates, broadly, as like a dragon. Suddenly some of the silliness in that series makes sense. But it's perhaps surprising that their big break was the best launch title for a Nintendo system. But it's one you should be playing. Perhaps make sure you're using your best controller for the job, mind. On the back page, remember magazines? I hope so, otherwise this has been a really confusing half an hour. But do you remember fanzines, the indie sibling of the magazine? Back in the day, photocopied 15-page periodicals written for love of the source material and often valuable companion pieces to commercial monthlies. They were killed even before magazines were, by all of the same factors, but also by the fact that any idiot could have a blog or a YouTube channel where they talked absolute bollocks instead. One woman is bringing that back. Longtime friend of the channel Sasha presents Between the Scanlines, a mostly fortnightly tome bringing back the feel of a photocopied fanzine being passed around the playground. Take issue 17 for instance. We've got a look at machine prices in 1997. The 16-bits holding on surprisingly well despite the N64's presence. There's an in-depth look at the attempt of LCD game pioneers Tiger to do a proper console with the can only have been 1997 name of Game.com. There's early wireless controllers and Game Boy games enhanced for colour. Find out for yourself though. Just follow Sasha on what we're still calling Twitter or Mastodon and you can find out how to get issues. But why not consider going the full pretend it's 1997 and subscribing to the thing on Patreon? All the cool kids do. And all the cool kids will be back here next month. And if you subscribe to all the YouTube channels we've told you to over the years, you might even be able to guess which one with a love for cryptic clues about following episodes it is. If not, you'll need to log on next Moto to find out. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.